A friend invited me out for a beer after work, and by the time we were halfway through our second round, my planned last, a familiar face appeared on the other side of the bar. He was more of an acquaintance than a friend, someone I only knew in passing. Striking up casual conversation, he turned to me and asked, "Are you and Paula going to the 15-year high school reunion?" Paula is my wife. She's 37, my partner of 13 years, and the mother of our two boys, John, 11, and Bill, 9. She's a real beauty. Slim and around 6 inches with dark raven hair that always shines in the sunlight. We met back in college during our senior year and married right after graduation. Since then, she's always worked, except for the short break she took when the boys were born. My work, meanwhile, is flexible enough to be done online, so I rent a small office nearby, sharing an assistant, which works well. This is how we ended up settling in Paula's hometown. My parents were separated and lived in different states, while Paula wanted to be close to her own family, so it made sense to build our life here. We married in this town and never left. Curious, I replied, "Oh, do you know my wife?" "Sure, Paula and I graduated together. I'd be surprised if she missed the reunion. Usually, a lot of people turn up. For the 10th one, I think almost everyone from our class showed up." I frowned, a little surprised. I hadn't heard about it, but I'll check with her. "When's it happening?" "Next Friday, at the convention center." Paula must know all about it. She's actually on the planning committee and has been handling all the RSVPs and correspondence. She's definitely been busy with it. I nodded, making a mental note to bring it up later. "I'll ask her when I get home. Thanks for the heads up." After another quick chat, I called it a night and headed home. That evening, over dinner, I mentioned it to Paula. "Hey, someone I ran into mentioned your high school reunion. Is that something we're planning to go to?" She looked thoughtful for a moment. "Oh, I'd almost forgotten about that. Thanks for the reminder. I sent in an RSVP a month or so ago for just myself. I figured you wouldn't be interested in hanging around a room full of strangers. I'll probably drop by for a few minutes to catch up with some old friends. Usually it's a pretty low-key event." That caught me off guard. She hadn't mentioned the reunion to me, and her tone didn't match what my acquaintance had said. According to him, it was a popular event with a big turnout, but Paula made it sound like no one really showed up. The next Saturday, Paula was working, so, feeling a little suspicious, I decided to pull out her old high school yearbooks. First, I flipped through the individual pictures. Paula was gorgeous back then, too. She hasn't changed much, though her hair is shorter now. As I turned the pages, I scanned through various group shots and organization photos, the kind you find in every yearbook. In one of them, Paula was lined up for an award, holding hands with a guy. In another, which looked like it was from a homecoming rally, the same guy had his arm around her. I checked his name, Frank York. Curious, I picked up Paula's junior yearbook. Sure enough, I found a picture of Paula standing close to Frank, close enough to suggest that they were more than friends. My gut told me that they had probably been a couple, at least during the last 2 years of high school. Was he the reason I hadn't been invited to this reunion? I needed to follow up, especially with the guy at the bar who'd mentioned it to me in the first place. Problem was, I didn't remember his name. Figuring he might be a regular, I tried my luck and went back to the bar the next evening. After waiting through a couple of beers with no sign of him, I gave up. But the night after that, I got lucky. Midway through my second beer, I saw him. This time, he sat further down the bar, so I moved over to an open stool nearby. He greeted me easily, not seeming to mind the company. After a bit of small talk, I casually dropped a question. "Paula mentioned an old boyfriend named Frank York. You wouldn't know him, would you?" He chuckled. "Oh, sure. Everyone knew Frank and Paula were inseparable all 4 years of high school. I don't remember ever seeing them with anyone else. Frank's one of our class success stories, actually. Married now, a few kids, and his father-in-law owns a big tech company out in Seattle. Frank's executive VP and set to take over when his father-in-law retires. He's a good-looking guy, about 5'10" inches or so, maybe 170 pounds. He was here at the last reunion, so I'd bet he'll show up this time too." I finished my beer, thanked him for the conversation, and this time I asked for his card. His name was Oscar, which at least gave me a way to reach him if I needed. Back at home, I found Paula in the kitchen, busy with dinner. After giving her a quick kiss on the cheek, I headed to my computer and looked up Frank York. Oscar's description had been right on point. Frank was married to a woman named Nancy. They had 3 kids, and he held a VP title at a large tech firm. I knew Paula had been popular in college, but I couldn't recall her ever mentioning a serious boyfriend before me. We didn't know each other well until we met at a friend's party, and we quickly became exclusive. But Frank, well, he went to Yale, which was worlds away from our college. Maybe that was why Paula hadn't talked about him. He was in another league, so to speak. Could it be that Frank had been her first love? Maybe, instead of staying faithful, he'd met Nancy, who came with a wealthy, influential family. Could Paula have been heartbroken, left suddenly single and rebounding when she met me? And even if she'd moved on, could those feelings still linger, especially with him being back in town for this reunion? I spotted Paula's cell phone on the table, charging. Knowing her password, I couldn't resist a quick peek at her call history. 32 calls over the last month, all from a Seattle area number. Quite a coincidence, considering Frank York lives in Seattle. I noted the number, highly suspecting it was Frank's. The next morning, I called my office, letting my assistant know I'd be out until noon. As soon as Paula left for work, I logged onto her computer. She might be diligent about passwords, but I knew she kept a list of them in an Excel file. I found a folder labeled Reunion and opened it. 3 full sheets of names popped up under Coming, and I scrolled down until I saw Frank York's. Next to his name, number attending read 1. No surprise. Looks like Nancy, his wife, wouldn't be joining him. Needing further confirmation, I asked my assistant to call the Seattle number from her personal phone. No surprise there, the man who answered identified himself as Frank York. She quickly hung up, pretending it was a wrong number. For such a big shot, I was surprised he picked up an unknown caller. Maybe the area code was familiar. By now, I was almost certain something was happening between Paula and her old boyfriend, Frank York. All those frequent calls and the fact that she hadn't mentioned the reunion planning raised suspicions. If their conversations were strictly about the reunion, wouldn't she have told me? Why the secrecy? The casual dismissal of the event as no big deal? Determined to find out, I ordered a few gadgets from a spy shop, 2 voice-activated recorders and a GPS tracker with rush delivery. I slipped a recorder in the home office and another under the driver's seat of Paula's car. The GPS device found a snug hiding place in her trunk. It wasn't foolproof, but now I could track her car and listen in on any suspicious calls. So, what would I do if they were indeed planning an affair? If it went that far, I'd have evidence of her infidelity, and might even have a case for custody of our boys in a divorce. Or, I could intercept it before anything happened. I grew up with divorced parents, and while it worked, I wanted better for my boys. Discovering that Paula had cheated on me at previous reunions would make the decision simple. No discussion, just divorce. For now, though, I decided to give her a chance and prevent anything before it happened. If I found evidence of something serious, I could still go for Plan B, divorce. If that proved to be best for John and Bill, just 2 days later, the recorder in her car delivered all the proof I needed. Paula's side of a phone call confirmed everything. Hey, yeah, I'm all set for when you arrive. I can't believe it's been 5 years already. Things were a lot simpler back then, right? You're still arriving Thursday, Delta, 5:37? I'll be there to meet you. Let's skip the arrivals area and meet at Flan's bar. Maybe grab a drink before you settle in. I've got a friend covering for me on Thursday evening, so we're good until around 8 o'clock. Lance found out about the reunion, actually. Some guy mentioned it to him at a bar, but I let him know I'll be going alone. I'll see what I can arrange for Friday night, though it'll take a little planning. Can't wait to catch up. There it was, all I needed to hear. Now, there was no more guessing. Paula was planning her little rendezvous for Thursday night and an overnight Friday after the reunion. I had my friend at the bar to thank for throwing a wrench into her original plan. I wondered what her excuse would have been. Likely the classic too drunk to drive, staying at a friend's place routine. At least I knew what I was dealing with. I'd need to keep her distracted and out of Frank's bed Thursday night between 5:37 and 8 o'clock, and again all Friday night. It looked like she planned to come back home Sunday. And as for Frank York, I'd have to do something about him, or to him, to prevent this from becoming a recurring issue. When Thursday rolled around, the day Mr. York was due to arrive, I left work early and drove by Paula's office. Her car wasn't there. She must have taken the afternoon off to get herself ready for her high school sweetheart. When I got home, her car was parked out front, so I let the air out of one of her tires and the spare, just for good measure. Then, I headed toward the airport. At around 5 o'clock, Paula called, sounding frantic. Hey, could you come home? I promised to pick up an old friend from the airport at 5:37, but I've got a flat. Could you fix the tire and let me take your car, please? Please, hun? I replied, keeping it cool. Sorry, I just dropped my boss off at the airport about 10 minutes ago. Just call your friend and tell her I'll pick her up instead. What does she look like? There was a long silence on the other end as Paula scrambled for an answer. Finally, she said, It's not a she, it's a he. We were meeting at Flanagan's bar for a quick drink before I dropped him at his hotel. I chuckled. Even better, guys usually spill all the dirt about high school and old friends. Just let him know I'll be at Flanagan's around 5:45. Text me his name and number. I hoped she'd call him from a phone I had bugged, so I could catch her end of the conversation. When I walked into Flanagan's, a man waved to me from the bar. Approaching him, I asked, Frank? He nodded, so I suggested, Let's grab a booth and have a quick drink. One drink turned into two, and it seemed he was just as curious about me as I was about him. Eventually, I suggested, Why not cancel that hotel reservation and stay at our place for a few nights? No need to waste time alone in a hotel room. Tonight, we can pick up Paula and go out for dinner. Tomorrow, you two can head to the reunion together. You can ride with Paula, and we can even play a round of golf in the morning. I called Paula to give her the good news that her friend would be staying with us. I told her to get ready for dinner out. She sounded thrown, maybe even rattled, but I didn't care if they thought I was suspicious. It might even help my cause if they felt like I was watching their every move. When we got home, Paula gave Frank a polite hug, though there was a little extra familiarity in it. While they chatted, I went upstairs to shower and change, but not before retrieving the recorder from under the seat in her car and taking it with me. The recording was golden. Paula's message to Frank confirmed everything. Frank, I'm sorry, but Lance is coming to pick you up. My car has a flat, and I called him for help, but he was already at the airport and said he'd get you. He's about 6'2" and 195. He has your number. I'll text you his. Damn, I'm sorry about this. I don't know how I'll meet you later tonight, so let's make the reunion tomorrow and the rest of the night special. Can't wait to see you. Love you. Over dinner, Frank suggested some dancing, which I actually found amusing. Playing the third wheel in their little reunion was turning out to be strangely satisfying. I took the first dance with Paula, keeping her on the floor for a second one before letting Frank have his turn. They kept things relatively innocent, though they did dance a little closer than I would have liked. Back home, I expected Paula to suggest I head to bed while she and Frank caught up, but she didn't. I guess she had told him I was onto something. The next day, I kept Frank occupied on the golf course, staying within earshot of either him or Paula for most of the day. I also made sure the recorder was back in her car, and I inflated her tires. She'd need her car for the reunion, complete with the tracking device and recorder. I'd be taking mine that evening. Later, I called Oscar, my friend from the bar, and asked him to do me a favor. Can you give me a call once cocktails and dinner are done and the dancing starts? Oscar sounded intrigued and readily agreed, probably picking up on my suspicions. It sounded like he might keep an eye on Paula and Frank himself tonight. Paula looked absolutely stunning for the reunion, dressed in something I'd never seen before, an outfit that flaunted more cleavage than she usually showed, and a daring slit that promised a glimpse of what I was certain were new, matching panties. She clearly intended to make an impression on Mr. York when everything eventually came off. I'd be lying if I said the sight of her and Frank preparing to go out didn't sting. She was beautiful, and he was annoyingly good-looking. The knowledge that they'd been lovers long before I came into her life and were planning to be again had my blood boiling. A part of me wanted to throw Frank out and lay down the law, but I held back. I needed more information on how far things had gone between them over the past 13 years. For now, I promised myself this wouldn't end well for Frank, and possibly not for Paula either. I'd already arranged for Paula's mom to take the boys overnight, so I dropped them off and returned home, pacing the floor, eating leftovers, having a drink, and even trying to watch TV to pass the time. Jealousy's a powerful thing. Finally, my phone rang. It was Oscar, eager to report his findings. He described Paula and Frank sitting close, with Frank's hand drifting up her thigh and inside the slit of her dress. As the music started, they began dancing close, with more than just casual familiarity. Already dressed, I grabbed my keys and headed to the reunion. The place was packed, and it took me nearly 10 minutes to spot Paula and Frank on the dance floor. I hung back, watching as they moved together. They seemed unconcerned by the fact that familiar faces might be watching, especially when Frank's hand started to drift down to her backside. That was enough. I walked up, took his hand, moved it firmly to her waist, and said, "Cutting in," nudging Frank aside to dance with Paula. She hadn't realized it was me at first, thinking it was just someone else cutting in. When the song ended, I led her back to their table, thanked her for the dance, and disappeared into the crowd. After grabbing a drink at the bar, I found a spot where I could still see them. They spent the night mingling, with Paula especially popular among the guys. A given, considering the little dress she had on. When she and Frank danced again, they kept a respectable distance, as if feeling the eyes on them. I had no intention of joining their table or dancing with Paula again. She waved a few times but kept her distance, likely fearing that another close dance might push me over the edge. I watched as the night unfolded, catching up with Oscar at one point and filling him in on a few details of the situation. Around midnight, as the crowd began thinning out, I noticed Paula and Frank preparing to leave. Paula came over to me and asked if I'd like to head home, mentioning she was getting tired. I shook my head, replying, "You go ahead. I'll be back shortly after. I just need to finish this conversation with Oscar." For sure, I could have simply gone with them, but I wanted to check what they were talking about when they thought I wasn't around. Paula nodded and blew a quick kiss. I wasn't about to let them get creative. I activated the GPS on my phone to confirm they'd actually go straight home, trailing them by half an hour. Frank must have heard the garage door because he was waiting when I got out of the car. "Hey man, I want to apologize for that dance you walked in on. Guess I'd had a bit too much with dinner. Paula gave me a pretty hard time back at the table for getting a little handsy," I thought to myself. "Sure, but she didn't seem too bothered when your hand was on her thigh." Out loud, I replied, "I get it. Easy to get carried away when you're dancing with someone who looks like Paula did tonight." Paula came in just then and wrapped me in a hug. "Glad you could make it to the dance, hun. I wish you joined us at the table. I don't often get to dance with my husband." It was obvious they'd prepped each other for how to handle me, assuming I was upset about the bum grab on the dance floor. They were right. I was furious. In fact, Frank had come close to ending up on his backside right there. Still, they'd clearly had a long conversation about how to keep old Lance comfortable, likely wondering how they'd manage to get Frank into Paula's bed before his flight home tomorrow. They probably thought they'd convinced me I was being paranoid, or, at the very least, had given up on the idea of doing anything tonight. Little did they know, I'd be listening to the recordings from Paula's car soon enough to hear exactly what they discussed. I couldn't imagine they'd risk anything under my roof, but I was ready if they did. Paula and I headed to bed together, and she stayed there all night. She said, "I'm too tired for intimacy, but I want to cuddle and show you how much I love you." I couldn't help thinking she wouldn't have been too tired for Frank if I hadn't disrupted her plans. I barely slept, and by early Sunday, I was already up, downloading the recordings of Paula's and Frank's conversations onto my computer, keeping the originals in my car. When Paula came downstairs, coffee was ready, and she didn't bring up last night's dance floor incident. Not a word about Frank's hand on her. But the extra kisses and attentive glances showed she knew I wasn't happy. When Frank came down, Paula made us a hearty breakfast, and we sat around chatting for a while. After about 2 hours, she finally said, "Well, it's time for Frank to head to the airport. Lance, why don't you relax? I'll take him." She must have known that idea wasn't going to fly. "No, that's all right, Paula. I'll drive him." "Oh, okay," she hesitated. "Frank, why don't you grab another coffee in your suitcase? Paula, I need you to see something upstairs real quick." Paula looked puzzled, but followed me to our bedroom. I shut the door firmly behind us. "Paula, there's an audio file on my computer all set to play once Frank and I leave. You need to listen to it. It's a recording of your phone conversation with Frank from a few days ago and another from your car." Paula gasped, her hands flying to cover her mouth. I continued, "When I get back, you'll have a choice. Option 1, you'll have packed and be gone. Option 2, we'll talk about what's gone on between you and Frank, starting with our wedding day 13 years ago. I'll need a written account of each time you've been with him, where and when. And I mean the truth, Paula, no lies or half-truths. If you go with option 2, I want you to think about our 2 boys and how you see this working for them. Because just so you know, I'll be asking Frank the same questions and he'll answer honestly, likely under some pressure. His account and yours better match up exactly." I paused. "You don't need to come back downstairs. I'll tell Frank goodbye for you on our way out." As we pulled away, I took a gravel side road that eventually narrowed into a dirt path. Frank looked over, a little worried. "Is this really the way to the airport?" "Oh, it's a shortcut," I said, glancing his way. "Next time you visit, They'll have widened this to a 4-lane highway. When we stopped in the middle of the road, he looked even more surprised. I pointed out his window, directing his attention to a low hill. See that knoll right over there? Just on the other side, there's an old farmhouse. What's left of it anyway. This land's part of a corporate farm now, but back in the day, the original owner dug a well by hand. It's a deep one, Frank. He squinted out the window, as though trying to spot the farmhouse I'd described. This matters to you, I said calmly, because that's where you're going to spend eternity. Frank whipped his head around, eyes wide, as he found himself staring down the barrel of a .38. His whole body stiffened, and his hands flew up instinctively in surrender. Frank, you've got a lot of nerve showing up like this. Don't say a word, or you're going to find yourself in a tough spot. You think you can just come to town, disrupt my life, and think I'll sit back quietly? Consider yourself lucky I'm just here to talk. But remember, this is your one and only warning. Frank's voice shook as he pleaded, "Please don't kill me. I have a wife and kids who need me. I swear, I'll leave and never come back." You selfish coward. Should I be concerned about your family when you had zero regard for mine? You came here intending to wreck my marriage and just walk away unscathed? You have one chance to be honest with me. I'll be asking some questions, and if I sense any dishonesty, you're going in that well. Now, were you and Paula lovers through high school and into college? Frank's hands started shaking, and I half expected him to wet himself. Yes, he admitted. How many times have you and Paula been intimate since we got married? At the first reunion, I had her undressed in my hotel room, and we were close. I had my hand on her, and then she stopped and said, "I'm married. I can't do this to Lance." She got dressed and left. I tried to convince her to stay, but she was done listening. And at the second reunion? Nothing happened. We didn't even plan to meet. I danced with her a couple of times, that's it. Can you put the gun down now? Not a chance. When I put this gun down, it'll be to drag your dead body to your new home. Frank was practically in tears now. What made you think this time would be different? I don't know. I called her to let her know I'd be at the reunion, and we made plans to grab dinner. The conversation got more flirtatious each time, and I just went along, hoping I'd have an evening with her, maybe all night. But honestly, I was afraid it would end like the first reunion, with her backing out. Throw your phone out the window, now. Even under threat, Frank hesitated, then finally lowered his window and threw it out. Not that you'd be smart enough to memorize Paula's number, but I'll be watching. If I catch you calling her, I'll find you. And if she calls you, ignore it. It's in your best interest. Take that as the warning it is. You've cost me and my family enough, and it's all I can do to keep from putting a bullet in your skull. Once at the airport, I parked and told him to get out. If you ever set foot in this town again, you won't get off so easy. As I drove back, I reflected on how oddly satisfying that encounter had been. But now, the hard part was ahead of me. I had to face Paula, the woman I'd loved for years, the mother of my children, my best friend. How I handled this would define our future, my boy's future, and what would come next. A part of me almost hoped she'd be packed and gone. It would be easier that way. When I pulled into the garage, I noticed her car parked there. She was still home, probably listening for the garage door. She knew I was back. I braced myself in the car for a few moments, gathering strength. I knew the moment I saw her, I'd feel an instinct to hold her, to console her, but I couldn't do that. Not now. I didn't know if I ever could again. Paula sat at the kitchen table, her head buried in her arms. She had clearly been crying for a long time, and a note lay beneath her hand. Without her looking up, I gently slid the note from under her arm and read, "Dearest husband, I am so ashamed that you had to hear that recording. I have no excuse other than a foolish attempt to relive my youth. In looking back, I realize that these reunions have been a way to reclaim those high school days, and Frank was such a big part of them. I wouldn't normally consider wearing a dress like that. It was part of the attempt to go back to a time when life felt free and easy. I don't imagine I'll ever wear it again. Frank and I were in love through high school and our first 2 years of college. We shared many intimate moments then, and I think I loved him deeply. But he moved on, found someone else, and broke off with me, eventually marrying her. You're probably wondering if you were my rebound after Frank left. To be honest, I don't know. What I do know is that I haven't loved him since we married. I've only loved you. Since the day we exchanged vows, I've loved you more than anything. I don't believe I would have gone through with it, but I know nothing on that tape suggests that. It all sounds as though I planned to sleep with him. You asked me to account for any times I'd been with Frank since we married. I haven't slept with him, or anyone else, since our wedding day. I've only seen Frank at the reunions. During the 5th reunion, we met up in his hotel room, and things got a bit too close. I regretted it afterward and carried guilt over that for a long time. If you have any more questions, I'll answer them honestly. Please don't make me leave. I love you. I love our life with the boys, and I'll do anything to make this right. Sitting across from her, my mind spun, thoughts colliding in a storm. But I knew that no good would come from breaking up our family. For the boys, for us, and for the life we'd built, it was worth finding a way forward. I reached across the table, taking her hand. She stiffened momentarily, then relaxed, lifting her tear-stained face to meet mine. With tears of my own, I managed a small smile. She read it right, got up, and rushed into my arms, sobbing as she buried her face in my neck. Lance, I was so scared. That night, we made love with a deep tenderness, both feeling that somehow we could work through this. The next morning, we sat down to talk, and I laid out what I needed from her to move forward. First, she'd need to see a counselor to confront why she felt compelled to relive her high school days. Second, she had to promise to cut off all contact with Frank York, hanging up immediately if he ever called. Third, any social gathering, whether reunions, Christmas parties, or company events, she would only attend with me. 3 months later, we were on the right track. Paula had found a counselor she trusted, and she'd already attended several sessions. As far as I knew, our boys hadn't sensed any tension between us. Paula and I now spoke openly about the reunion and what might have happened, thanks to her sessions. Eventually, Paula worked up the courage to ask what I'd meant by Frank answering questions under extreme duress on the ride to the airport. I was honest, telling her that Frank had left emotionally shaken but unharmed, though I'd made it clear things would be different if he ever came back. One quiet Sunday morning, I sat with my coffee, skimming through the business section. An article caught my eye. A tech company shakeup had led to a new executive VP. Frank York's name wasn't there. He'd been demoted. I couldn't help but wonder if it had anything to do with the tape and letter I'd sent to his wife and father-in-law. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, comment, and hit that subscribe button for more of Love, Lust, Lies.